Here on the left is Commander Byrd, then I'm the next one, and then three boys from Harvard. The one right now is Norman Vaughan, and then Mike O'Brien and Bill Flint. 5 college men led by a college professor starting out on a 1,500-mile sledge journey that will bring us to the mountains I want to reach, and also lay down depots on the way that we shall use on our way back, and that will be available if the polar flight party has any accidents and must depend upon resources on the ground, so to speak. Now we are leaving the Bay of Whales. It's on the border of the Bay of Whales that Little America was built. During the wintertime, the bay ice gets pushed up into great pressure ridges, and the most difficult part of the journey which we are making is the beginning. In some ways, that's a very good way to have things arranged. If you could get over the things that we are seeing now, then we can assume that the remainder will be a lot easier. You note the way we are working. The dogs are in pairs or teams, just as you would drive horses. And then we ski along beside the sledges to make sure that they are going all right. And we run the dogs by calling to them. We also carry a heavy whip, and sometimes it's necessary to be a little bit rough with the dogs. I should say that I took all of these pictures myself, with the exception of a very few. Great big crevasses like this. A crevasse is simply a great big gash in the ice. They're not hazardous, they just look bad, but if you can see them, then you usually aren't foolish enough to fall into them. The real hazard of the crevasses comes when they are bridged over and you do not see them, and you may walk out onto it. I did that one time and fall in. Where the going is as rough as this, as you see, it's necessary to break up the teams and carry things across a little bit at a time. Now, anybody who doesn't think this is hard work is mistaken, but anyone who doesn't love to do it should never go on an expedition. This was the last expedition that had to depend entirely upon the dogs for surface travel. I mean by that when we came alongside the ice and had to unload all of our supplies, including our houses and so on, they had to be all transferred by these sledges for 10 miles to where Little America was being built. Now, look at this carefully. This is one of the pictures that I myself did not take. You may judge from that the clumsy man on skis is Larry Gould, which is correct. See that? See, the next man going over was not as awkward as I was, and there was no problem. Here we are making camp at night, and you will notice the tents in the background and the dark material on top. We put that on top so that we could sleep a little bit better. You see, we are in the daylight continuously now, and we will be until... Oh, right there is my beloved lead dog, Al Smith. I haven't time to tell you how we came about calling him Al Smith, but depending on your point of view, he was either a great dog or not, but he was a great dog. About every, I've forgotten it at the moment, but every few miles we would unload a part of the stuff we were carrying along and put it into a depot like this. Now, we had to depend upon this for our sustenance, both men and dogs, on our return journey. These also were to serve as resources for the polar flight party if by any chance they had a forced landing, because they did not have any food. As it turned out, we didn't know at the time that would be the case, but when the polar flight was trying to get over the mountains toward the South Pole, they were overloaded and they had to unload a good many things, including the food. So these might have been very important. You see how we fix things? We put all of our supplies in these canvas tanks, primarily so that if there is an accident and they do fall through a crevasse, we will not necessarily lose our food. That looks like a bicycle wheel, and indeed that's all it is. But it's so geared up that as when we go along, it tells us with surprising accuracy how far we have traveled. Ordinarily, you don't think of sails and dog sledges in the same thought. But we knew that we would be traveling a great many places with the wind behind us. And so it occurred to some of us that maybe these handmade sails of ours would help the dogs along. I'm glad we did it because it adds a little bit of character to the pictures, but actually I don't think it amounted to very much. Here we are. This gives you a real notion of how hard the work is. It was the hardest for me because I was the worst skier in the whole outfit. In fact, I skied for 1,500 miles without ever learning how. We stop at the end of the day, and the tent behind us there is the cook tent. In order to keep dry, we never would do any cooking inside the tents where we slept, and so we had a special one. Now you see all of my companions sitting down on these logs, logs of ice, I was going to say. We had a tripod so we could put the camera on it and get all of our pictures in it. That's why you see all of us. Modesty forbids me to mention the name of the man at whom you're looking here, but it was my task to do all of the cooking. Maybe you'd like to know what we ate, but I know you wouldn't like it. The things that he was just putting down there now what we call hardtack. I think that was a good name for it. You may think I'm exaggerating, but it isn't. I used to take my rock hammer now and again to break them up before I tried to break my teeth on them. The chief food was what we called hoosh. The primary item in it was pemmican. Pemmican made from dried beef, ground up and mixed with a bit of fat and other things, and 1 pound of it was the equivalent of about 5 or 6 pounds of raw meat. Notice that every man gets a wooden spoon, and that makes good sense. It's as cold, it might be 20 or 30 below here, and if you put a metal spoon in your mouth, you might lose a part of your tongue. And to make sure that we were safe, we had wooden spoons. As the days and the weeks passed, the same routine food every day became rather tiresome, but we enjoyed it very much because there was no alternative. But quite frequently we'd have dreams about food. Notice the dogs, the way we've fixed them for the night, a long chain, and then they are tied to it with a shorter one. Not so much that they would run away, but when we feed them, there's sometimes a good deal of competition. Notice how the keys are always put up in the snow. When you're traveling where the wind is blowing in the snow, you may lose things overnight. This plane got the start of me here, I guess. That is the plane on its way to the South Pole. And when they passed over us, a little parachute opened from the bottom, and we picked it up and found, amongst other things, a few messages from Little America, and one that I liked very much, and that was the results of a football game between the University of Michigan and Harvard. I had 3 Harvard men, and they were telling me what Harvard was going to do to Michigan. The score was Michigan 14, Harvard 12. I never heard about any more football on the game. You see us here, busy making camp for the end of the day. The dogs are each given a pound or more of dog pemmican. And you see the reason we had to keep them on the lines was so that they wouldn't interfere with each other. You always feed them at the end of the day. You mustn't feed a dog early in the morning because he would get sick. This is the kind of weather that you saw there for a moment that's bad for the dogs when it's warm enough so that they melt the snow around about them. This is an interesting device for preparing our food that was put together with one of our gifted people right in Little America. And the whole idea, of course, is to melt the snow so that we'll have plenty of water to do what cooking is necessary. Dining was rather tight, as you can see. All 5 of us got into that little tent and ate our hoosh and our biscuits and drank tea. We found that tea was by all odds the best drink, though you might like coffee better. It's better to carry tea. It's a better thing to drink, and also it's much better to handle and to prepare. That's exactly, that might be me. I'm not sure who it is, but that's the way we traveled along. Now we are nearing the foot of the mountains. In the background, these are the mountains that I want very much to see. We have come about 800 miles, no, a little less than that, before we really arrive at the foot of the mountains. Amongst the dogs that you see, there were some that were born in Little America and they had never seen rocks before. I remember when we drove up for the first time near the rock, it may have been Al Smith. I remember seeing him walk up and lick a bit of the rock, thinking perhaps that it would be something that he could eat. We are nearing the rocks that I had come all the way to Antarctica to find, so to speak. And I still remember as we were working up toward the flat-lying rocks that covered the highest of all the mountains, I was collecting rock on the way, and I still remember that the nearer we got to the rocks I wanted to see, the less I felt that they would be what I wanted. I wanted to find some sandstone, and I hoped that there might be some coal in it. And when this picture was taken, that was happening. And I still remember sending a message something like that back to our headquarters at Little America. No symphony I have ever heard, no work of art before which I have stood in awe, gave me half the joy that I had when I picked up a piece of sandstone and realized that it was the rock I had come all the way to Antarctica to find. I wish I had time to tell you what that sandstone means, but we have to hurry on. It looks as if we were getting ready to have a little luncheon. We stopped at the midday, always, and had some hot tea and a piece of hardtack and a bar of chocolate. You might think that in a situation where everything must be weighed, that you never carry anything that you do not need. Well, a thermos jug was one of the best things, because after we had our dinner in the evening, I would fill it with oatmeal, and then in the morning the oatmeal was all ready for breakfast. Then we would fill it with hot tea, and we could have hot tea at the time we stopped for lunch. After we got to the foot of the mountains and had climbed up and found the kind of rock they were, then we skied along the foot of the mountains toward the east. And we knew when we got beyond the 180th meridian that we would be in a part of the continent that had never been claimed. This tells its own story. I was taking a sight on the sun to help us get an accurate location of where we were. Note how the dogs look. They're hungry. The way a husky, holds his tail reveals the kind of dog he is and the situation he's in. If he has his tail curled really nice up on his back, then you know he's in pretty good shape. Partly because of the thing I was wearing on my head, I suppose, and partly because that I insisted on people doing what they should. I early was given the name of Simon Legree. Isn't that the right name, Simon Legree? I think so. Well, here we are. We were in new land where no one had ever been before, and we put up this little flag and took off our hats, and I made a little speech in which I said we were claiming this land for the United States in the name of Commander Byrd, etc. Those claims, of course, didn't mean anything in the light of the fact that any kind of claim must be followed up by actual getting the place with people. On the way back, by sheer accident, we came across this cairn. We knew that Amundsen, the great Norwegian, had been to the South Pole 1916, and that on the way back he had stopped at the base of the Axel Heiberg Glacier and built this little cairn. In it we found a tin can, and in the tin can a bit of paper which records the fact that he and his companions had reached the South Pole from the 10th to the 11th of December 1911. I should have said before, not 1916. And he records the fact that all of the men are well and the dogs are fine and they're happily on their way back. That is a historic piece of paper, and when I got back to the United States, the American Geographic Society and several others thought they should have it. I kept it. I took it with me to Norway in 1949 when I'd been invited to go over to give a lecture. And when I got there, I found that I not only was to give a lecture, but I was to be a guest of His Majesty King Haakon to receive the Cross of Olaf, which is one of the highest honors the Norwegians can give. We've gone a long way now. We're on our way home. This is the last of the depots we built on the way out. and we still need food, so we'll dig out some of the snow and have plenty of supplies to take us on the rest of the way back to Little America. Note how small the team has become now. We started with 45 dogs. We ended up with 21. There was no alternative. Ordinarily, on the way back, when the dog could not pull his or her weight, they had to perish. But old Tickle was the name of this wonderful old black dog. We loved him so much that we didn't want to dispose of him. And when he came along, I think I really told him that if he could keep up with us the rest of the way, then it would be all right. He could live, and indeed he did, and he went with us back, clear back home to the United States. Now you have seen the record of one of the last, if not the last, great journey by dogs in Antarctica. Today, over snow vehicles and the airplane have taken over all methods of transportation. So far as I'm concerned, that means the end of the romance. So long as I live, I will look back to the long sledge journey as the high point in my life.